The U.S. President Joe Biden and Kenyan President William Ruto on Thursday announced investments in green energy, education, and health, manufacturing also in the country. Now, there are also plans to reduce its debt burden. Ruto arrived in Washington on Wednesday as part of a three-day visit that includes bilateral talks with President Biden on Thursday, followed by a state dinner in the evening. Now, Ruto's trip is the sixth state visit hosted by President Biden's administration and the first for an African president since 2008. Now joining me on the program is Declan Galvin, Managing Director of Exigent Risk Advisory from Nairobi. That's a Nairobi-based strategic and geopolitical risk advisory firm supporting the private sector and also multinational companies invested, or investment across Africa. Now, thank you for joining me, Galvin.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
I mean, the president has come under some sort of scrutiny as regards his travels. I remember using the word a president going around the world. It's been quite a number of conferences, summits, countries, all with the aim of pulling investment to Kenya. I mean, so far, how would you rate this globe-trotting vis-a-vis the level of investment in the country at the moment?
Well, so, I mean, I think President Ruto will, no question, have an amazing track record in terms of the return on investment from his global travels. So just this week, it was announced that Kenya received the largest private sector investment in its country in history, more than $1 billion from Microsoft and other kind of AI partners. Just in one single investment alone. So this investment, which will be no doubt kind of scaled over several years, is tremendous. It's enormous news. So that in of itself, I think, suggests that Ruto's travel, however critical people are of it, is yielding tangible results for the public.
Let's bring it down to, of course, his recent travel to the United States, where, of course, he announced that Kenya and the U.S. would, of course, invest or collaborate in areas of green energy, education, health, manufacturing, and, debt relief. Let's speak it by piecemeal, right? Let's start with the, should I call it the big elephant in the room, debt burden. How do you think this can work?
Well, so President Ruto has made the restructuring and basically balancing of debt obligations a much more significant policy priority, which impacts the entire continent more so than his predecessors. So this is something that he's talked extensively about. That includes one way to kind of balance trade through trading in local currency. So this is something that he's really spent a tremendous amount of time on. And it's something that's overdue. If you look at the debt sustainability analysis from the IMF and the World Bank, if you look at the overall kind of geopolitical and economic trends, there needs to be a deeper conversation around this, and it's obvious that Ruto is wanting to position himself as somebody who can lead those talks. I don't think that it's a tremendous. I think it's important, but I don't think that it's something that's upsetting precedent too much. It's something that everybody needs to have, and ultimately, bilateral and multilateral debt to African countries needs to be managed in a manner which ultimately allows the economics and markets of these countries to be unleashed.
All right. There's also the issue of diplomacy. Now, Biden, according to reports, will designate Kenya as a major non-NATO ally, making it the first sub-Saharan African country to receive the designation. Now, I want to put this vis-a-vis Kenya's recent proposal of donating police officers to Haiti to actually, champion stability there. We know that gang violence and, takeover is happening in Haiti. How much of this do you think it will, at the end of the day, rub off on the economy of Kenya, particularly for the Kenyan people? And do you think the country even has the capacity to actually sustain moves like this?
So we need to look at the decision by Kenya to deploy police to Haiti in kind of a multifaceted perspective. So to be sure, Kenya's participation in this, which is helping to advance kind of U.S. security interests within the Caribbean, that's definitely one dimension of it. The other dimension of this is that Kenyan police officers both receive technical assistance, they receive training, and they are now going to be part of Kenya's remittance economy. And building jobs abroad that allow remittances to be sent back into Kenya has been a significant priority for this current administration. So ultimately, from the government's perspective, there's very little downside. So you're deepening relations with a significant ally. There are lots of willing individuals who want a significant salary. And then that money will overwhelmingly be sent back home. And so this is ultimately the calculus that was involved in the Haiti deployment.
Now, we also understand that the two countries launched the U.S.-Kenya Climate and Clean Energy Industrial Partnership. Now, the U.S. and the Kenya plan is to work with international financial institutions, and also multinational trust funds to identify a mechanism for mobilizing investments in clean and green energy. I know that for some time now, Kenya has actually been at the forefront of green energy and also tourism. My question to you is this. Do you see a situation where this particular particularly in green energy, we know that for now the world runs on petrol, and even though there are alternative research being done and also investment in that direction, how soon do you see this kind of investments yielding fruit, and also do you really see it having much of an impact, particularly on the people of Kenya?
So the green economy and looking for renewable sources of energy is not just a priority for the government, but there is a significant ecosystem and private sector ecosystem in Nairobi, in Kenya, that is looking to tap into this. So these kinds of arrangements between the government of Kenya and the government of the United States is really going to provide the momentum and the kind of financing that a lot of businesses operating in Kenya are really kind of starved for and looking for. Kenya has a whole range of opportunities in terms of energy, including petroleum and oil, but there's liquefied natural gas, there's sun power, there's air power, and Kenya is really looking to diversify its energy capabilities for export to both European countries as well as other East African countries. And so this is a major economic move for the country, where they're ultimately looking to kind of grow that and ultimately, have more profit from it.
Okay, because I'm also going to explore the aspect of this partnerships. Quite a number of people would also tell you, including experts, would tell you that many of these alliances and partnerships don't just come, but without interest. What do you think the U.S. stands to gain, or what do you suspect the U.S. stands to gain with such partnerships? Because I'm seeing education, I'm seeing health, I'm seeing green energy, I'm seeing diplomacy in terms of partnership and alliance. I'm seeing figures going into it from the U.S. to Kenya. What do you think it's in it for the U.S.?
So U.S. interests in Kenya and I guess sub-Saharan Africa more broadly, it's multifaceted. So unfortunately, although it is still the case, the U.S. views Africa through a defense cooperation lens. And so if you look at the dynamics within the East Africa and the Horn of Africa region, we have an ongoing terrorist insurgency in Somalia. We have a de facto civil war going on in Ethiopia, and while that's improved, ultimately it's very tepid. We have militancy in South Sudan. We have a lot of governance issues as well as a coup d'etat in Sudan. So we can, continue the list of security problems. And Kenya is one of the few countries in the region which has maintained a kind of stability along the lines of security and governance. And so the U.S. wants to make sure that it strengthens ties in that because of the scale and scope of security issues. The second interest that the U.S. has is the geopolitical map is both shifting and then becoming more acute. So we have competition between the United States and China around markets and around building the right kinds of alliances to advance one another's competing geopolitical interests. And the U.S. no doubt sees Kenya as an important player within the broader sub-Saharan Africa dynamic in order to both kind of consolidate and then build the right partnerships with to move forward and advance collective interests. Those, I think, would be the two main dynamics at play.
I mean, you talked about Africa, being some sort of the, for want of words, for grabs, from world powers. You used the word competition between the U.S., countries like U.S., China, and maybe Russia. My question is, at the end of the day, doesn't this place Africa in a very vulnerable spot where, I don't know, maybe for grabs, place Africa, at a disadvantage of some sort?
So I think the short answer to that is no.
Why?
Africa is not up for grabs. Africa has a collection of sovereign countries which have demonstrated over the last 50, 60 years that they do have sovereignty and they make decisions. These decisions that these countries make often counter or undermine what we would call kind of collective Western interests. And there are lots of decisions which would advance collective, both kind of whatever the state is and kind of Western interests, quote unquote. So it's not true that Africa is up for grabs. What is true is that we have in Africa, the most diverse continent in the world. We have the highest concentration of states, and these states all have their own independent interests, which they are looking to advance in the most meaningful and expedient way possible. Sometimes that's going to be through making deals with China. Sometimes that's going to be making deals with the United States or the European Union. No three of those power blocks, if we'll call them that, are totally aligned. And sometimes there are governments in Africa which see that their most immediate interests will be served by aligning with Russia. And you pointed out kind of Russia's quote unquote growing influence, which I dispute, but nonetheless I'll just take that for granted. Russia is no doubt.
I'm sorry. Why do you dispute Russia's influence?
Well, so if you look at, for example, the war in Russia's war in the Ukraine, there were far more countries that either voted against Russia, within the Security Council, or decided to not vote than those who chose to vote and align themselves with Russia. So if Russia's influence was genuinely growing at a significant pace, then we would have seen far more countries more overtly align themselves with Russia. And that's simply not the case.
But don't you also think it's as a result, I'm sorry, but don't you also think it's as a result of the narrative that has been peddled over the years that
then what we end up seeing is
the US
more of the
are the good guys and maybe, other countries like Russia and China, on the other side.
And that becomes a more concern. So it's not that we've got well-established democratic regimes who have had successive administrations and peaceful transfers of power that are aligning themselves with Russia. These would be governments which are overthrowing their predecessors and aligning themselves. And that is a very major difference. So that needs to be articulated, but I would like to hear the rest of your points or questions.
Okay, I'm still going to ask you my question again. What I was trying to ask you is, don't you think that the reason why you think Russia has not that amount of influence that maybe is presumed to have is because of the narrative that has been, thrown in over the years that the US and its allies are the good guys. And Russia, countries like Russia, China, are the bad guys for, reason of maybe political interest, political ideology, what have you. So don't you also think that narrative over the years is what has made certain countries feel, you know what, let's just align with the US and its allies?
So not necessarily. There's an element of that. But if you were to ask me the same question about China, I would give you a different answer than what I just gave you on Russia. China's influence on the continent is growing. China is deepening relations, both diplomatic, political, security, and economic, with countries in a way that I believe is outpacing US advancements and EU advancements. So no, I don't think that it's simply a kind of a Western narrative that is being widely accepted. China is advancing its interests. China is far more involved than ever before. And China is building relationships with actors which are universally considered legitimate and not being questioned in the way that what we see with what Russia's doing. So these are not the same things.
Now let's talk about Africa's relationship with the rest of the world. We know that right now Africa has been vocal when it comes to global matters. Countries like South Africa, for instance, taking Israel to the international court. We've never seen issues or scenarios like that happen, but we are beginning to see African leaders taking the center stage, taking the front seat, particularly in policy initiative, decision making, and ideology. Are we beginning to see an Africa that is self-sustaining, or an Africa that seems to still echo the shadow of its colonial masters?
So I think that if we look at Africa broadly, which is a very unhelpful paradigm, because again, as I mentioned earlier, we have more than 54 states, all of which with their own unique interests, their own economic development plans, their own foreign relations. We are seeing certain countries advance and kind of articulate their perspectives on issues. That is not new, right? We have had that going on the continent since the 1940s and 50s. So I don't think that there's anything miraculous or unique about it. Whether it's Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana, whether it's Julius Nyerere in Tanzania, the list can go on. There has always been states across the continent advancing those perspectives and interests. And I think that we need to really appreciate and recognize that, because it's not true that these states have always just kind of followed the music of former colonial oppressors. There's voice here.
All right, let's bring the conversation back quickly before I let you go to Kenya. President Ruto, one of his aims is to make Kenya, a tourist hub. And for that reason, introduce some diplomatic policies, as regards visa, particularly for African nations, amongst a list of other issues. Do you think the president is actually going about all of this as policy directives the right way in terms of process and implementation?
Well, I think so. Although, I mean, that's a good question. Ultimately, Ruto has articulated that he wants a visa-free Africa, by a set date, and so he is looking to bring as many Africans visa-free to Kenya as possible, and he sees, in terms of Kenya's strategic national interest, it is a transit destination and a destination where people visit for both tourism and investment. So yeah, I mean, I think he's really scoping out the vision, and he's taking charge and saying, this is what Kenya is going to do first, and we would like other African nations to do the same. I think that's trailblazing. I think that's excellent, and it certainly advances Kenya and EAC interests. And And I think on balance, it helps all other African states.
All right, Declan Galvin, thank you so much for joining me on the conversation. Managing Director of Exigent Risk Advisory from Nairobi. Of course, we also understand that it's a company that is based when it comes to strategic and geopolitical risk advisory firms supporting the private sector and also multinational companies' investment across African markets. Thank you once again for your time, Galvin.
Thank you so much.
All right.